All the dependencies are installed in folder node modules. The last step of the initialization of our application is to add the proper Typescript configuration. It's done by adding the tsconfig file, which includes all the dependencies and needed instructions, which tells our app how to behave, strictly in the Typescript. So, to have it done, it's needed to install the Typescript. It's done by the command npm install typescript --save-dev. It's installing our TypeScript in the project. It's just done previously, but the terminal proceeds this command to show it properly. Then we need the command npm install types node --save-dev. It's installing the types for node.js, which will be needed in the proper endpoint configuration. We have installed this before. So, to have the configuration file, it's needed to add the command quite long npx tsc-init and other steps. So by entering this command, I will receive tsconfig.json file, which includes all the files, all the dependencies needed in our configuration. You can see that most of them are commented. So after deleting this commented part, we will receive the ultimate configuration, which looks like that. It's what we need across our app. Next and very significant step of building our application is to add index.js file, which will be included in the source folder. So our project needs another folder of source directory, and within this folder I create a new file, index.js. This file will include the Express app, so it's necessary to import Express from Express. And another package needed in this file will be body parser, which allow us to make a readable response. Okay, we have our imports, so now I have to define the HTTP port, which will be run. So I create the variable HTTP port, which will process the environment variables, and by default it will set the 3001 port. So to process the environment variables, I have to type process.env.http port and logical OR sign for 3009 and 1. You can define the number whatever you want. What it means that the HTTP port will have the value of environment variables included in the development ready application, or here in the env file, which should be not included in this part of the tutorial, or the localhost 3001. Okay. To create new Express app, it's necessary to add the line of initialization of Express app. Const app is equal to Express, and this is our very basic configuration. So I will define also body parser, which will be used through our application, app.use body parser, and I will add JSON. It will make our responses more readable in the JSON format. Okay, having that, we'll make the basic listening of the application to run the Express app and show it on the terminal. So to have it done, it's needed to type app listen HTTP port brackets, and we'll log the listening on port number HTTP port. Call the function and it's ready. So after typing the command npm start, we'll have our Express app running and listening on port 3001. All the scripts defined in these applications are in the part of the package JSON called scripts. So you can define your own names. Having the configuration of index.js file, we can now start implementation of the entire API. So, to make this API configuration, we need to add new folder called config, which will have two files. Let's start with the file config.ts. This file will include some basic variables like server hostname and server port, which will be exported and proceed from environment variables or by default added to localhost and used through our application during the development or in the production mode. So let's get it started. We have to import .env package to have the environment variables correctly processed. It was installed in previous steps. We will run the .env configuration and add new variables like server hostname process .env server hostname or localhost, and the server post will proceed environment variable of server post or 3001. So after running the server, we would like to have the localhost 3001 by default, or the server hostname and server port proceeded from the environment variables in production mode. To export this properly, I will create an object const server, and it will include hostname, server hostname, and port, server port. This configuration will also include the object config, and this object will include the server with the configuration of our previously declared server object. Config will be exported by default. Making such a configuration of the API is a more elegant way than just implementing the basic HTTP port variable on the index.js file. So we have managed their multiple configuration and export it in one object and import wherever you want in the application. So it's needed to make a small configuration here. So I will import config object from config file, and now I can replace this variable with our config server port. Now the port will be directly imported here on the console log, and we have the HTTP port compiled properly. Another needed step in our basic API configuration is adding some logins. To have it explained, I will add a new file in config folder called login.js, and inside this file we'll add some few logins which are directly info, warn, debug and error, and they will be displayed with timestamps while making some requests. So it will help in our development process by knowing exactly what kind of request is done at which time, and if it needs some information or error or debugging. So to have this done, firstly I have to define the timestamp, and it will be made by the function getTimestamp. It is a type of string, and it will return new date object, and it will be stringify. Okay, so now I have to add an info log, and it will take as arguments namespace, message and object. Namespace is also typed string. Next, message also type string, and object not necessary, so with question mark, and type any. Okay, I close the brackets and add some if validation. If there is an object, I adding the log, and there within I will add the string with getTimestamp function. It will give us a proper timestamp, info. It will mark that it's an info object, namespace, and message. Beside the string, it will also return an object. Okay, so if there is no object, I will log practically the same without the object. So we can just copy and paste. The same situation is for another logins like warn, error and debug. So I will just copy and paste it 3 more times. Change names like warn, and of course in brackets warn, warn. Next will be error, and of course variable error. And the last but not least, debug. Okay, we have our basic logins, so it's just needed now to export that, and it will be exported by default. And we will attach info, warn, error, and debug. All logs are completed and ready to implement it in our project. One of additional 2 steps to finish the API configuration is adding the controllers and routes. So starting with the controllers, we'll define new folder within the source structure called controllers and create new file index.js. In this file we'll have the very first endpoint called server health check. It will just check if API is working properly and gives proper response. In the further implementation, there will be added some controllers like mind the block and get blockchain status, etc. So to just have it done, it's needed to import some dependencies from the Express, like next function, request, and response. And now I need to create the very first endpoint called server check. Okay. And what is needed right now, this endpoint will take a request, type of request from Express. It's a Typescript, so we have to define the type of the argument which is passed through the function. So we are just using the imported ones from Express and also next of type next function. So the body of the function will return response status 200 and JSON object message server running. Okay, and it's just needed to be exported, as there will be another endpoints. I will make an object and add their server health check. That's the very first endpoint, and let's get it done through the routes and check if it works. One last step before updating the index.js file is adding some routes. As we'll have multiple routes, let's add it in the new folder called routes, and there we'll have a new file index.js. It's the most efficient practice to have it separately, not in one file or in one structure. So to have it done, I have to add some imports. Import Express from Express. Okay. And import controller from controllers. Okay. Now I can set up a router by express router function and set the first routing router.get #check, and this URL will return our controller .check. Sorry, server health check, and we will export router. Right now there is a need for modifying the app listen function so that we can listen our server properly and add some routes which we defined previously. Right now we have one route to the check server and apply some rules of API. So to get it started, we can delete this app.listen function and add some rules of API. It's done by app.use request response next arrow function, and then I will add a command remove in production because we will now add some course origin avoiding rule. Response dot header access control allow origin, and we are setting that every origin can avoid the course policy. If request method is equal to all options, response header should be set to access control allow methods, and these methods are get without the comma, patch, delete, post, put. It's totally sufficient right now for our developing purposes, so we will return the response status 200 dot JSON and empty JSON right now. It's okay, and then we are initialize next function. This app.use arrow function is directly avoiding the course origin, so we are capable of making requests to the server from every URL. It can be really dangerous in the production, so there is a special command line to make us remember that. Right now on development purposes, it can be totally okay to avoid that, so we will just continue. The next step is adding the routes and arrow handling. So right now I will add the routes, and it is done by app.use, and we will use the URL /API. So every route we created is after API. Then we are adding the routes which we created before. So if we have the route check to check the server health, we are requesting the URL /API/check. /check will not be working because we are making the special API URL. Right now we'll add the error handling. And it's made by app.use. Request response. Next. And then we are defining the error is equal to new error, and it will indicate to not found. Okay, we have the error object, and right now response, status, and status for not found is 404.json, and object message error dot message. There is an error response, of course. Okay, so now as we deleted the app listen function, we have to make it slightly different, but it's necessary to include there so our server will work properly. And it's made with HTTP server variable. And we are using the HTTP library, http.createServer method, and app as an argument. And we will make HTTP server listen config server port is from our config file. Then we are logging our infos, login.info, namespace, and the string server is running variable config server hostname, and we are indicating the port of the server. config.server.port. Okay, so we can check if the server is running okay. I will initialize the terminal. Server is running localhost 3001. Log info, everything is okay. We are ready to implement the blockchain classes.